Today's reading comes from Mark chapter 5, verses 21 through 36. When Jesus had again crossed over by boat to the other side of the lake, a large crowd gathered around him while he was by the lake. Then one of the synagogue leaders named Jairus came, and when he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet. He pleaded earnestly with him, "My little daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her so that she will be healed and live." So Jesus went with him. A large crowd followed and pressed around him, and a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all she had. Yet, instead of getting better, she grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak, because she thought, if I just touch his clothes, I will be healed. Immediately, her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was freed from her suffering. At once, Jesus realized that power had gone out from him. He turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who touched my clothes?" "You see the people crowding against you," his disciples answered, "and yet you ask, 'Who touched me?'" But Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. Then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet, and trembling with fear, told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." While Jesus was still speaking, some people came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue leader. "Your daughter is dead," they said. "Why bother the teacher anymore?" Overhearing what they said, Jesus told him, "Don't be afraid, just believe." This is the word of the Lord. You may be seated.
Well done, Em. We've had some lengthy passages recently. Look, I want to tell you my favorite part was hearing the shouts of our children during the reading. Good morning, everybody. If I haven't had the chance to meet you, my name is Phil. I have the privilege of being the lead pastor here at the Square, and just so excited to just have this morning with you, and even the season that we find ourselves in as a church family. Today, I want to talk about this teaching that I've titled The State of the Square. It feels a little more ominous than I think I'm trying to communicate, but that's the value of a good title, right? It needs to be some form of hook. But no, there really is a moment in my heart of trying to speak to one, I think something this passage is really trying to communicate about who Jesus is. But also, I think it matters that we speak into the story at hand in the life of our church. That there's a lot that's taking place and a lot that's happening, and I really believe that this is something that has been stirring in my heart really since we've transitioned from gathering in our former building to being here at Smyrna Elementary, that there's a part in the journey for us to just stop and go, okay, how are we? Where are we? What is God doing among us? And in many ways, this is a unique Sunday because it's like so many different things into a single vision. A sermon, I want to give you a financial report for 2024, naming the sense of the moment we're in as a church. I lead at all times with some level of prophetic angst. I want to tell you about a launch of a new ministry. I want to talk about clarifying next steps. And it's funny, literally, I started working on this teaching briefly just about 3 weeks ago. And when I started to kind of pull out all of those details of what I sensed. And it wasn't that was like all of these things have to happen in one day. It was the sense that all of these things were supposed to happen in one day. And for a while, this was the only things on my notes. So this is not like a point. It was just, I found it really funny that I wrote these 3 things as I was wrestling through it. Option 1, you're an idiot. Not me. I was writing this about myself as I was processing this. Option 2, you're about to put in a masterclass of communication. While I knew it was unlikely, listen, I want to tell you I've already done one, so let's just eliminate number 2 from being an option in there. Or option 3, Jesus is kind, and he's going to take all of the clunky parts and use them anyways. So I would tell you, if we tip from option 1 into option 3, you can just text anyone who was at first service and say thank you for helping us get there. But there really is that like awareness. And what I know in that is that there's these pictures of things that speaking to all of them with a level of kind of focus and brevity that normally we would look at things a little bit longer in each of those dimensions. But there's a collective invitation that I think I want to put in front of you today. And even as I begin to process it more, the picture that came into my mind was just a moment of a family conversation. And I don't know if that's a normal thing in your house, or if you've experienced that, or that was a part of your life growing up, that there would be moments where you would just have kind of like, hey, we gather the family, we sit at the kitchen table, and we're going to talk about the state of our family. How are things with us? What do we need to talk through? What do we need to address? And I think that picture is the picture that's in my mind. And I put that in front of you, that there is a moment, I think it matters for us to just have we got to pull up the chair to the kitchen table, and I want to invite you into a family conversation. And I don't know if you've ever been a guest at somebody else's family conversation, but it is awkward. I remember distinctly in high school a couple of moments where I stayed the night at my friend's house. The next thing I know, I'm a part of a conversation like, I do not want to be here right now. What I want to say, if you're new in part of our church family, or if this is your first Sunday, I promise it won't be that awkward. And I actually do think, regardless of whether you've been here for a long time or you're still processing where home could be, actually having this moment to talk as a family, I think is an invitation to all of us. But as that picture formed for me, it really began to speak about just connections to very real scenarios. I think that I'm experiencing in my life and my family, and I think many others are, about there is a very real moment where Emily and I have been doing a lot of processing about the Manginelli house, about the season that we're in, about the challenges that we're facing, about the things that are going so well and the things that feel difficult, and all of the other elements. That there really is a conversation that Emily and I are having and beginning to invite our kids into about this unique season in our own home, where there is this recognition of complexity and challenge. And what we begin to realize as we were processing this, as I've been processing through this, is it's really easy to see all of the details, or to follow, to create the list of things. But one thing stands behind them all, which is that there's a culture to our home. And it's like we're in a moment where the culture of our home feels challenged. The culture of who we really are. Emily and I believe that there's a culture to being a Manginelli. There's a mark of identity that we carry that matters to us. There's a culture to our home, and it's not even negative things. So many of the things that bring complexity or challenge are really beautiful things in our lives, but there's this undeniable thing about the culture of our home feeling challenged. And even when you begin to write down all of the things that do that, right? Like I have 4 children. I adore my children, 15, 12, 10, and 8. Jacob, Rowan, Ariel, and Cyrus. But you just begin to, people ask me, hey, what are you going to do tonight? I'm putting my kids to bed. I am always putting my kids to bed. I have no life. I have 4 children. That is like, you wanted to, like, I didn't, when we were younger, we developed kind of like a family rhythm. And it's like, you're like, well, what are you going to do in your evenings when you're 42? Put your kids to bed. I didn't know that. That's basically those realities. Like, bedtimes are crazy. They're amazing. I love you, son, so much. I'm being facetious, but I'm being real. Like, they're just like, well, welcome to the complexity of life. I mean, the amount of times, Emily and I, can I tell you what word I would be happy to never say again in my life? I like, every time I hear it, I cringe. Screen time. I hate that word. I hate that word. How many times I say that word. I hate how that many times that word comes up in the conversations of our lives. But it is like that tension of just like, what are we going to do? And then about dinner time. And Emily and I both work full time, and we're both on staff here at the church, and we're leading our family together, and like the rhythms and is it where it should be? And then our commitments, and like not big commitments. Like, you let 2 of your 4 kids have 1 commitment, and you're like, that's your life. And there's just like the challenges that are involved in that. And then but the bigger things of recognizing like a season Emily and I have been naming of like, oh man, the complexity feels high and the grace feels low. And what out of all of the things, you begin to look at the details, And then you immediately go to like the problem solving side. And you're like, okay, this is going to be our master solution. This is going to be the plan. Here's the new chore chart for the 17 other chore charts that didn't work before. Here's the dinner plan to cook the meals we'll never actually cook because we couldn't cook them before. And here's the reward system. And here's all, you just can like dream and you can see it. It's real. They're real plans and there's real effect in them. But actually it's not even, when you're walking through these kind of moments, you actually stop and you pause and you're like, oh, it's not that these aren't real or that strategic solutions aren't helpful, but it's not really about any of these things. It's always about one thing. It's about the culture of our home and recognizing that there's a challenge to the culture. And the culture of our home has this sense of feeling weakened. And the reality is when you begin to ask the question in that, the culture of the home is always weak in the same way, which is because the heartbeat of it gets under attack, gets distracted, gets confused. And under attack has an inherently negative kind of phrasing. And I think that in negative ways, but I also think the complexity of life is hard. The really good things having elements to them can be hard. And I recognize how much that picture speaks to the season that we are facing. It's amazing about what happens when the heartbeat of your home is displaced. Now, Jesus is the heartbeat of our home, but the tangible physical embodiment of that heartbeat is my wife. And it's funny when you, just even in this picture, I've noticed this, that like if I travel, and Emily and I both travel from time to time, and I'll be gone and I come back, I'll walk through the door and my kids are upstairs and I'm like, hey guys, and they're like, hey dad, and maybe they'll run downstairs, right? It's like, dad's home, he's been gone for a bit, but that's fine. If Emily's gone on a trip, if her presence is displaced for a little bit, it's like, I do not possess the power to peel them off of her. I like she was gone just for a few days. Last night I came home after something I was finishing my sermon, and my kids are like literally. I don't know if any other part of their body could have been somehow attached around. Like they were just clinging to her, and it's a picture of this of like, oh, just for a night, the heartbeat wasn't embodied. Emily and I both, we both bring just beautiful things and who I am as a father, who she is as a mother, and the strengths of what we are, the culture of our home. But I've come to learn this after so many years, is that when Emily's gone, things run a little bit smoother. My kids don't whine as much. I don't tolerate, like those, like just there's that picture of like, I'm just kind of like, but it gets a little more routine, right? We just kind of survive. What's missing is that there's a life source. She embodies this heartbeat that without her in the presence, you feel it. And last night, even the tangible reaction of my children, just for a moment, they just were clinging to her. And it speaks to this picture of like how much we always have to have the heart of who we are in alignment. How much the feeling and the embodiment of that picture. And it's in that vein, as I share those stories, because for me personally, I would say that picture of what Emily and I and others I've talked to feel in this season, I think is a picture of this season in the life of our church. It's not, my teaching might come with an invitation to tell you there's some things that are happening among us that we have to take seriously. But what would be a miscommunication of that would be that the overwhelming truth of where our church is at in this season isn't just joy and life and what God is doing is remarkable. But there is a reality that in the midst of all of the remarkable things that God is doing, the culture of our house feels challenged. The culture of this house feels challenged. And I am growing more and more aware of what that means and what it's speaking to and what's required. And most of it is just the reality of circumstances. Let's just go through the list. If we wrote it, we have a brand new environment. Like actually moving a church is a pretty big deal, and moving from a home base to a mobile setup and all of that it requires. And then in the backdrop of that, the past season of an entire fundraising campaign and building scenario and this news and that news and changing news and who knows what's going to happen and when is it going to happen. And then, as I've shared with you before, we walked through a season of the greatest internal structural change as a staff, and then we had staff transitions, and then this reality that just our church is made up of groups of people that have their own lives. And I can't, and maybe every season of life is always like, maybe this will be true no matter what day in the future I say this, but distinctly more than ever before, it's like no matter who I'm talking to, whether they're single, whether they're married, whatever the age of their children, or if they have any, every person I know is like, the demands of my life are overwhelming. I cannot escape how many. I'm sure there's some of us are like, man, life's pretty awesome right now. Yes and amen. Jesus, would there be some here? No, and it's not even that it's not awesome. My life is awesome, but my life is complex and demanding. And it's just not even the challenge of what's negative. It's the challenge of just what is. And then again, you can just go through the list. You can easily respond to it the other side. What's the strategic vision? And how do we do this? And how do we move people towards each other? And this launch of this thing and creating this new scenario. And how do we impact this? And you can, again, and there is a place for seeing distinct things and having strategic responses. But the same truth for my home is the same truth for our home. It's not the right conversation, because in the end of the day, it's not about the complexity of the many things. It's about the singularity of the one thing that matters the most. The culture of our home. Because what I've learned is that it is always, your life is always going to have complexity. Your life is always going to have challenges. Your life is always going to have the true virtues and values of what it is put in pressure moments. And the only way through them is not strategy. The only way through them is my culture true? Has my identity become refined deeply enough to navigate my way through the other side? And I believe this. I believe just that the culture of our home has this weakened state because the heartbeat of our home is under attack. And the challenge in front of us isn't the details of all the various challenges we're facing, but the way those challenges try to usurp the one thing that makes us who we are, our culture. And culture is not something that I think you can simplify down to a single word or statement. I think to truly name who we are as a people, it requires the fullness of all of the different ways we try to do that. But undeniably, if there is one thing that speaks to who we are above anything else, and I don't think this will surprise you, it is simply this: we are a church that loves Jesus. There's one thing. There's one thing above all things. There's one part of us that defines all the other parts of us. And it's helpful when those other parts are named. It's not like identity should be ambiguous. It should not. But there's recognition. And what I see, what I sense, what I don't know how to describe to you other than I see the pockets of it in distant places. But I'm aware enough to know this: if you tolerate the loss of your culture, if you allow for the one thing for who you are to shift long enough, the damage is significant. And I feel the warning in my own heart, the warning in my own spirit, that this is a moment for us in the midst of all that God is doing, in the midst of all of the remarkable things that God is establishing, for us to see there is a defining of a one thing and a refining of that one thing that stands at the forefront of the season. We are a church that loves Jesus. And in my heart for us, through all of the just varied things I want to put in front of you, I want to just tell you that I believe it's a season in the life of our church where we will have to fight for our culture in a way we've never had to fight for it before. Because there are parts of it that are just simply in the next season of maturity, right? If you've walked with people, if you raise kids, you get this. There are seasons where part of the culture of who you are, you don't make you make non-negotiable for your kids. There are seasons where we're going to pray together at a certain age with my kiddos because that's what we do. But then there's the season where it's like, yeah, you're gonna have to make the choice, son. It was unfair for you, like for me to throw my longing for your prayer life over your life. Like, I love you. I'm fully in your corner, but it's like this thing that was always provided for you. Now you have to take that step into a maturity that you have to seize it for yourself. And some of it is even just think about the scenarios. I mean, I think in whispers, you understand what I'm saying? For those that were at our previous building, you remember those moments where just the tangible sense of the presence of God was so real and the voice of the worship among you was so loud, you kind of lost any sense of self-consciousness about how bad your own voice is, and you could just feel a sense of freedom and delight. And there was a relational intimacy because there was no room, so you were literally living on top of every other person that was in the room next to you, so you were going to meet somebody whether you wanted to or not. That was a culture that was chosen for you. Not necessarily, it was like chosen by circumstance, but it was chosen. And then you get into a different environment. It's just, it's normal. And you're like, oh, I can hear myself. Oh, I have to choose to say hi to someone. Oh, I can come and leave and never have to engage. And suddenly what wasn't even a choice has to become chosen. It's only one element of it, but you see it, right? You can hear it, you can feel it. And I think that's what's stirring in my heart is it's actually something I think Jesus is doing on purpose in us. But we have to name it. But we have to see kind of what's happening in our story to do that. So let me just take, which is a connected part, but just a small little pivot. And let me tell you about our finances from 2024. One, we do this because it matters to us. This is not my money. This is our money. The stewardship of the finances of the church matters to all of us. The greatest conviction that I carry in my heart is that every single dollar that is ever given through the square is an act of worship to Jesus and needs to be treated with that level of integrity and honor. And it is, I take deep responsibility that part of my role is to be accountable and faithful under Jesus and to you, that our worship is spent rightly towards what God has asked us to do. And in that conviction, these are things that I mentioned when I get the chance to, that part of what I want you to know is that I'm not involved in the personal details of people's giving. I'm made aware of certain gifts so that I can make sure people know that it's been received and communicate a thankfulness in different moments and distinct moments. But the reality is that this desire I have is that just because I refuse to allow a culture that where people could ever assume that they're going to be treated differently because they do or don't give, can or can't give, or the amount that's possible in it. But what that isn't is a sense of indifference. I believe giving matters. I believe that the call to generosity matters. My heart for you is I genuinely believe in the spiritual principle of first fruits. I believe that when we actually stop and say, the first of what I receive belongs to the Lord, and the biblical picture of belonging it and giving it to the Lord is in the church family that I belong to, I believe is not just a statement of trusting God with what I have, but it's actually the claim, Lord, all that I am belongs to you. I believe when Jesus is the Lord of your finances, it changes your life. I understand the position I'm in and saying that to you. I understand the past that people experiences when it comes to finances, and that churches aren't always open books. So there has been things that were, or at least felt like, manipulative positions. I'm at peace creating and stewarding a budget that's in alignment with what our church family comes together and chooses to do. I have no appeal to you for a sense of finances, but I do have an appeal to you that I long for you to worship Jesus. And I long for you to catch a vision of what it's like when he's the Lord of your finances. I long for you to know the freedom when you are not your own provider, but you have actually established an anchored position of life that Jesus is the one who is enough, and it is his leadership in all that I am. And we've just learned this enough that the last two places of yielding to the lordship of Jesus will always be our money and our sexuality, because they speak in many ways to these two most sacred parts of our lives. And so I tell you unashamedly, I call you to just continue to grow, to yield to the lordship of Jesus. I long for you to know that life. And I believe this. You should belong to a church you both feel proud to give to and trust what you're giving to. And I hope that's a square, but if it's not, you deserve to find a home that you feel that way about. It matters that we have those shared places. But even as we look at the season, it's how could you look at this season without seeing some of the things that God has done in the midst of this? So let me just show this to you. And again, all of these details, if you go on our giving page online, you'll find this entire report. Our books are transparent. And so these are big picture numbers, but where you want to know more, care about knowing more, you can reach out to that. Ben McQuarrie, who is our operations director, where are you, Ben? I don't know. He's probably tearing something down as we speak because he's so faithful. Leads all of this. He's a remarkable man of God, and he is such a gift to us. But when you look at 2024, by the way, it's the single largest year of giving in the history of our church. And I just want you to see kind of the picture here. This is about unrestricted income. We have two categories. So restricted income is to the handful of very specific things. It basically will always be three things: the building, church planting, or global missions. Those are restricted. Any giving that comes towards them is isolated for, it cannot be spent on anything else. So unrestricted income is just saying general giving, tithes and offerings, things that come in. Return of the tithe, you might be like, what is that? We belong to a movement of churches, and I mean this when I tell you I believe in the spiritual principle of first fruits. So we as a church family give the first fruits of all that we have in alignment with our movement. And it's a choice we make because we believe that Jesus is not just the Lord of our individual finances, he is the Lord of our church's finances. And every single month, we as a church family say, we trust you, Jesus, by giving towards a greater movement of churches that we believe is doing remarkable things in the world. But sometimes they give us some of it back. So that's what the return of the tithe is. So just so you know. But that's what those things are. And then you see our expenses, but uniquely a year where we probably had some of the highest level of expenses that we've ever had. And technically out of unrestricted income, spent a little bit more out of savings than was brought in. But it makes sense when the complexity of moving mobile, all that happened within it. There was to take the steps we did required some finances that weren't established into our budget. But as a church council, we walked through that and navigated that together. But then go to the next slide, which is wild. And I can't just not look at you and say thank you for the radical level of generosity. Not only was it the highest year of giving in our general fund, then on top of it was a giving of over $2 million distinctly to either church planting or the building. And then you see a place where we have been giving towards church planting. We gave that $100,000 gift last year as a church family out of our convictions of our building fund towards them, and then the building expenses that have started to accrue. And so there's a lot there that is, as we continue to build, are going to keep moving in place. And go to the next slide. And so it's kind of in that big picture, and it's like I don't have good words. It's a disproportionate. Our size of our church, the age range of our church, to give $4 million in a year shouldn't be possible. It's crazy. So I just want to say thank you. It's a communication of your faithfulness. It's a communication of your trust in me, but it's a communication mostly of your devotion to Jesus. It's remarkable. So thank you. Yeah, you can clap for that. That's really cool. And we do need it. This is, I think, a weakness of our church because we are just, if you've been here long enough, you know this, that it's like the drive of financial growth or like size of our church growth is not what drives me. Our success is faithfulness and obedience. Do I want our church to grow? I want our city to get saved. So I don't know how our city gets saved and our church doesn't have some aspect of growth in that. But do I view whether our attendance or whether our certain finances are ultimately expressing our success? I don't. But I look at this and I just think this is an incredible story of the faithfulness of God and the maturity of the people I belong to. You can go to the next slide. And I just, again, want to just express honor. Is it dying?
Yeah, it's just dead.
One of those days. How long have I been talking and it's been dead? Oh, it's not dead yet. Okay. I was like, I was clueless. But I just want to specifically say thank you. Our church council is what other churches would call an elder board. It's made up of 5 members of our community, voted in by members of our community who share the responsibility of the stewardship of our finances. And so I am submitted to them. They are submitted to me. Together, only as a unit, we ultimately determine the budget where every dollar is spent. There's no money that can be given or spent without their approval. And it matters to me to tell you that we have a financial structure that makes mismanagement of our finances impossible. That matters to me. That you would know that everything that we do is done with accountability and transparency, that there isn't one single person that could just make decisions, and that it's not just the pastoral staff, but that it is from leaders in our own community, people who are distinctly both mature in their life with Jesus and gifted in the place of financial stewardship. Chris Stottel, Lee Burton, Robbie Lamp, Linda Knowles, David Kirchkin. If any of you are here, it's always you to never know which service they're going to be in. David, you're here. David, you got to stand up. Will you stand up, David? I don't know if any of other council members in this service. Oh yeah, Chris is there. There you are, Chris. We can honor them. Thank you. The leadership that they display is remarkable. And it's a gift. It's a gift to be able to walk into a church community and go, actually, and I think most churches are trustworthy. I think we hear the stories about the untrustworthy ones. I'm a believer in the church, but I think it matters to have structures that go, no, I can know that because it's ours. It doesn't work for all of us to be sitting at the table making every decision, but that doesn't change that it isn't ours. And therefore we steward it together under the accountability of Jesus, under the faithfulness of mission. And you can go to the next slide. And I just remind you that there's a reason every Sunday, nearly every Sunday, we didn't do it today, on different Sundays when we have other things happening, but often we will stand together at the end of worship and recite a giving liturgy. Why? Because we believe this. We believe that the radical generosity of our finances is worship unto the Lord. And it is the greatest desire of my heart that you would just in any way and in every way allow Jesus to keep shaping you into his image. And it's not just that you could look at our finances, and there's a lot of stories in those finances. There's a lot of victory in those finances. But there's a lot of other remarkable things happening in our church, like the seeds sown of this last season. I'll show you, by the way, a couple of pictures if you want to see what's going on over at the building. The one thing that has marked me is that everything's getting torn down is like, oh, it's bigger than I thought. Where was all this space? It was just hidden. But some amazing things that are happening, just other things. I wish I could spend more time on this. I know I can't because I was aware of how long I went over last service. But there is, we have more people in house churches than we've ever had in the history of church, which matters a lot to me. It's so awkward. Let's go. Yeah. Hey, listen, next time we clap, we're all in. That's the agreement. So save it, right? We're partnering, not only with the partnering with church planting in a way we never have. It's a dream in our heart, the establishment of it, the radical generosity, the movement towards global missions, the partnerships. There's so much that's happening in the life of our church. Freedom and breakthrough. People are experiencing Jesus in our midst. And there is just so much to celebrate. And in fact, a lot of the complexity is a byproduct of how much there is to celebrate. Please don't miss that part. But there is the complexity, and I see it. I think you see it too. Though I have a vantage point from my role that presents the uniqueness. And what I would say is that I think in the season of so much good, there's the partnership of the complex and the challenge of that one thing that makes us who we are has a pressure put on it. And you see the symptoms of it in little ways. Like, really interesting to me, we have had far larger and far smaller Sunday services than our largest and smallest service of 2024. It's actually, it's a thing. It's like, what is the thing it's telling you? I'm not totally sure, other than in this year, we're doing a little bit of this. And from a big picture perspective, you begin to go, oh, that little bit of shaking It's speaking to something. The reality of that more people than ever before have that sense of feeling disconnected. There's a loss of something. There's a grieving of something. There's a holy even discontent of other things. There's like a lot happening, but you're like, oh, there are things that are taking place. And it really is, I think, a story about what God is forming in us and the belonging he's trying to form in us. One thing I want to make note of is that I've come aware that I'll speak to right at the end of my teaching. But when you came in, you noticed this card on your chair. As we've kind of looked at the season, I would say one of the pain points as a pastor that I've realized is that we're in a season of life as a church where there is a greater level of need for love and care than we've ever known or experienced before. And I would say structurally, I think it is the weakest part of our church. Culturally, it's a high value, but structurally, it has been a weak value. And one of the convictions that's in my heart is this is a season where we need the ministry of care. People are walking through challenges. People are walking through difficulties. The call of the vision of the scriptures that's communicated by the love for widows and orphans, that's this greater picture that people are walking through challenges that require the love of our body. And I just want to tell you, one of the things that we are no longer okay with is not having that piece of who we are fully activated. And so we're launching like a full-on care ministry, and I am asking you to consider scanning this little thing. And if you're older and you're like, I don't want to do that, then you can find Pastor Sean Bentley after church and you can talk to him. But we are launching a greater care ministry that has 3 distinct teams: a mercy ministry, a freedom and deliverance ministry, and a pastoral, lay pastoral care, walking alongside people. And it is a season where the future of what needs to happen when people are walking through crisis or pain or situations in our church is that there is an embodied presence of Jesus from our church that is equipped and empowered to come and meet that. And I just believe that this is one of those things that it's like we need each other like never before. And as our church has grown, we need the place to be a targeted story of love to one another. And I want to tell you that I believe that this is a season where anyone in our church who is like, I care about hurting people, I am telling you, I'm inviting you to come and be a part of this. Because creating these next steps are going to be a part, I believe, of the power of the next season of the life of our church. So all you're going to find when you do that is like a form. Fill out your information. We're going to follow up with you. There's going to be an info meeting. There's going to be next steps. There's going to be trainings. You're like, hey, I want to help people get free. I have no clue how to do that. Don't worry. We're going to train you. And that's going to be amazing. And so I just want to invite you into those stories, but it's a picture of this season, and that bridges because this passage that just where I want to close, walking through the story, it's a story about this remarkable picture of Jesus in the midst of challenge, that he is a story changer. And it's actually the vision of Jesus, the story changer, that I think is speaking to who we are right now and who we're becoming, to what matters right now and how we find our way. And in the witness of Jairus and his daughter and this woman who have been bleeding, I think we're going to find a call from the heart of God that it's one thing that gets you through challenge, and it's finding that one thing that changes everything. The story begins with this, right? It says, when Jesus has crossed over by boat to the other side of the lake, a large crowd gathered around him while he was by the lake. It's like I've looked at this passage a lot of times. It's interesting to me how much that one line stood out to me, because I actually think it speaks to a season of life. Jesus had remember, this comes right after the story we looked at last week. Jesus leaves, goes to the other side of the lake, the non-Jewish side of the lake. He's on mission. What his mission really is he's on like a discipleship lesson with his boys. He's helping them learn how to trust him through fear, how to trust him through demons, how to trust him through pigs and Gentiles. He's literally trying to do some things. And he's also planting seeds in this other community that he's going to come back to, because his mission isn't just one side of the lake, it's both sides of of the lake, and he has to plant some seeds on the other side of the lake. But then he comes back, and he comes back to his kind of hometown. Capernaum wasn't his birth hometown, but it was the hometown of his ministry. So he's coming back to his hometown, and just this short little mission trip to the other side of the lake, and it's like the presence and demand of the crowd on the side of home is overwhelming. And I mean, I just could not stop seeing that this picture of this season of like, you just try to take one step forward into faithfulness, into obedience, into what Jesus is asking of you. And then you turn around and it's like how loud home just got. How the demand of home suddenly is like, oh my Lord, what did I do? It's just this overwhelming picture of this moment of stepping into mission and then coming back, and it's like home is angry because the needs are so loud, the complexity is so wild. And I just want to tell you this, that please, I really shared my heart with you in this. The demands of the crowd surrounding your life will either rob your true identity or refine your true identity. You're just gonna have to make a decision, because the crowd's not going away. The complexity is not going away. The figurative image that I'm trying to put in front of you in that is you lose your life forward, there is going to be the weight and the voice on the side of the lake that is just going to either shape you or rob you. And that's the picture of even, I think, the season we find ourselves in. Then one of the synagogue leaders named Jairus came, and when he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet. He pleaded earnestly with him, "My little daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her that she would may be healed and live." So Jesus went with him. Oh, you can't sidestep this ache. There's no greater ache that exists than the longing of a parent for the healing of their child. Like I want to pull some principles of this, but let me just tell you, like even in the weight of that, it's like you can't minimize. I'm not walking through challenges that Jairus is. And just the picture of the depth of them, the ache of his father's heart. But when you begin to see the story, you realize that this is a challenging story. It's not just this one thing, it's filled with many things. There's uncertainty, struggle, fear, disappointment. You could just go on and on. It's just what happens, what challenge does. It just is like you make the long list. How are you going to fix it? And of course, just this picture that in the demand of it, Jairus comes to a place of no more options until Jesus enters into his story. And it made me stop and just think, and just for a second, I want to name this, that there are some shared stories, I think, in our challenges. And individually, people, there's some real deep sufferings. I don't pretend that maybe the challenges we're facing are the same weight as Jairus's, but I think in the invitation, I see it. Let me tell you the first one, and I've already kind of spoke to this. I really believe that we're in a season where the demands of life are at an all-time high. I'm not sure, maybe that's just life now. I hope not, but maybe it's a season, maybe it's a moment, maybe it's just an invitation that we have to walk through. But I want to tell you what it does is it causes us to pull away from one another. When my life is so complex, how do you have time for the complexity of somebody else's life, let alone relationship? And it just has this effect. The demands of life are having an effect. The second, which is more complex than the time I'm able to give it, but I recognize that we're living through a really loud noise of our cultural moment. It's loud, no matter your perspective of it. And it's just has this way of like drawing you into it. And then as there are deep pieces of yourself and deep longings of your heart, and then you begin, what it does is like it pulls you in, then there's this sense of, am I alone in what I'm caring about? And as you ask the question, when I'm alone, what am I caring about? And then you look at your own beloved community, and then there's this like, oh, wait, are we really unified? I mean, I've had these conversations from the most conservative to the most progressive friends in my life. There's no statement I'm saying in this. I'm telling you, culture's loud. Culture's really loud, and it's making everybody feel the exact same way because it's just pulling, and then there's this sense of disappointment that happens. Like this very real sense of if they were, if even towards the church, or in one of these unique seasons in my life of really feeling in this last season the invitation of Jesus to not try to navigate through things I typically would, because basically as I was talking with the Lord, he's like, the problem is, Phil, you try to fix things that people, if you're successful in any way, it's a lie, because people find their confidence of unity in you, and people have to learn how to find their confidence and unity in me. And I'm like, Jesus, that I don't like disappointing people. And Jesus literally was like, yeah, but you have to. Because your people will never find unity if it's based in your mitigation of it. And to spend 4 or 5 months of feeling the invitation of Jesus to disappoint people so that they would not put a false unity in what I'm capable of. Because I'm not capable of a lot. I want to be, that's my weakness. It's not that I'm arrogant. I want to be something I can't be. But I feel that, and we feel that, and what it does is it just it pulls you away. Just that second guess. And then just that third piece, change has made what was once easy and chosen for you challenged and forced to be chosen. And again, we already kind of looked at that, but that's real. That's real. It's real in our heart. Prayer isn't easy right now. I don't think prayer is easy for almost anyone in our church. But that's the invitation, right? Who am I? Who you really are shows up in challenge. It doesn't show up in ease. It's really easy to be your kind of greatest vision of a self-curated identity when life is easy. Identity is shaped and formed through challenge. The passion we have for Jesus and the love we have for one another, it's not, I'm not here to bring like harsh correction. My heart is just to name, I think the culture of our house is under challenge, pressure. And there's an invitation in front of us. And the square is also living out that challenge story. The story continues. A large crowd followed and pressed around him. And a woman who was there had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all she had, yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. If you've ever been in those stories, you contend and you contend and you contend and you get help and you get help and you get help, but you get worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak because she thought, if I touch his clothes, I will be healed. It's just, there's the beauty of what's happening, right? On the way to Jairus' house, an interruption comes. A second story suddenly merges with Jairus' story, which, by the way, is the way the kingdom works. The way the kingdom works is that God leads your life, that suddenly this very unique story you're walking with, it gets merged with somebody else's that you could have never expected, but it's part of where God does incredible things. And when we're living at that kind of edge of one another, our stories have a way of never finding one another. That's a side point. The woman was also living in a challenging story. This issue of blood was not just a sickness that had marked her life, which it was. It was culturally for her damning. She was forced out of community. She couldn't worship. She couldn't belong. She couldn't be with her family. She couldn't be with her community. She literally had to live at the edge of society because she was ritually unclean according to the law. And as a faithful Jewish woman, she abided by those laws. So here was this displaced woman longing for transformation at the edge. Challenge, uncertainty, struggle, fear, disappointment. But what I do see, though, is there was something different in her story. And it took me a while to see it. It was like, what's in this woman that's different than the story with Jairus? And because it's not desperation, Jairus is pretty desperate. It's also not faith. I mean, as strong as her faith was, Jairus is living with a lot of faith. But what was different was the willingness of this woman to push past every challenge, to get the one thing that even she wasn't supposed to try to move towards until breakthrough came. It was 12 years. the suffering, the defeat. And then there's Jesus. I don't think she's from Capernaum. It's not like Jesus is in the same place very often. This is an ancient world. It's not like you have a second moment Jesus is going to be walking by. You don't know that. And she sees the one thing. And not only the challenges she had been through, but just the crowd is pressing in. And she's not supposed to touch anyone, not supposed to be near anyone, not even supposed to be in the environment she's in. She's already not where she's supposed to be, let alone how do you get close enough to Jesus and still not be where you're supposed to be? But the challenge just didn't sway her. And I don't know how, to move through this crowd, got on the ground and moved through legs and people to the point where she just had this vision. She's like, I don't even need to touch him. She's actually trying to protect him in some ways from the reality that she knows her status. But she catches this vision that if I could just grab a part of him. And I just think it's incredible about who you are in challenged environments is a revelation of your identity. And this woman, she won't let the challenges define her. It says immediately her bleeding stopped and she felt in her body that she was freed from her suffering. At once, Jesus realized that power had gone out of him. He turned around in the crowd and asked, who touched my clothes? You see the people crowded around you? His disciples answered, and yet you can ask, who touched me? You ever talk with Jesus like that? They're like, oh, come on, Jesus. What do you want me to say? There's like 10,000 people pressing in on you. Who touched you? Everybody touched you. What are you like? Please be more helpful. I mean, I love that Jesus isn't bothered. He's like, no, I'm just telling you, power just left me. It's not that I was being touched. It's that someone touched me. And here it's her fear and her shame keeps her quiet for a moment. But Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. Then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet and trembling with fear, told him the whole truth. He said to her, daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering. This radical healing. This moment's so beautiful, but I just want to look at this one part. It says that she grabs the hem of his robe. It's true, but the text is clearer than that. We read that and we think that she just kind of found any piece of cloth attached to Jesus and she grabbed it. Jesus was a faithful rabbi. He's our faithful rabbi. Let me remind you, we are the Gentile community woven into Jesus, our rabbi. And as a rabbi, this prayer shawl that he would have worn that was unique to him, it was a marker of his family. But every prayer shawl was marked with a unique identity. And it was at the hem of the robe, the hem of the garments, where these little tassels, you'll still see them now, and they're called tzitzi, these things that hang off, and they're unique to every person. Your prayer shawl is unique to your family, but your tzitzi, the edge of your prayer shawl, is unique to you. And because it was a statement of your own identity. In fact, you could go to the market. Like in an ancient world, you just didn't carry around money if you're making purchases. You had communities and relationships of trust. And you would literally, in the Jewish community, you would take your tzitzi and they would take these clay things and they'd press down on them. It's like a photocopy of your identity, saying, I promise I'm going to pay for these things. That's a picture, but I want you to see that picture because the edge of his robe was his name. Like she wasn't thinking, I just have to touch a piece of his clothes. She was thinking, I just have to seize and grab the identity of Jesus. If I could just grab his name. It's the thing. It's the one thing. To hold on to his name, to find him. And it's here as she grabs a hold of it. Healing breaks through her body in this disruption. And you just see the story and Jesus sits with her. And again, it's not that, listen, I'm not trying to miss the surface because the surface is not insignificant. The surface level picture that Jesus is a healer. Jesus has authority to heal. Jesus shows up in people's lives and he changes people's lives and he is doing remarkable things. But you see the picture about a 12-year-old girl and a woman bleeding for 12 years. These two stories of these two women colliding into a single moment, that the shared reality was about their displacement. A daughter displaced, one from her family and death, and the second from her God and her community. And it's Jesus' words, when he speaks to her, he reframes. It's not just that he heals her, he invites her back into her identity. Daughter. That's who you are. And this radical picture, guys, I just want to live my life that I'll fight through anything to get back to the name of Jesus. It's the one thing. And the transformation of her story was believing the identity of Jesus was greater than the identity of her challenges. That's where all transformation comes from. Believing that the identity of Jesus is greater. And culture is never created in the ease. It's only created by pursuing the one thing you'll lose everything else over. It'll always come back to one thing. The story, while they were still speaking, some people from the house of Jairus, the synagogue leader, said, "Your daughter is dead." Why bother the teacher anymore? Overhearing what they said, Jesus told him, "Don't be afraid. Just believe." It's hard to imagine what Jairus must have been experiencing. This disruption comes on the way to the most important thing that'll probably ever happen in his entire life. And Jesus gets distracted. You ever feel that? First, it was like, "Where are you, Jesus?" But then I thought you were on the move, Jesus. You said you were coming over to my house, and I don't get why it's taking so long. I don't get why it's moving so slow. And I see what you're doing in their house, and I'm wondering why you're not doing it at our house. And you just start to feel it in the voice that says, "Why bother the teacher anymore?" Oh, guys, that voice is loud right now. You want to know what happens in challenge? It's the voice of the world around you, the voice of community in your life, and the voice of your own soul that just says, "Why bother?" You know what contending gets you? You want to know what trying to move towards faithfulness gets you? It gets you to the point where Jesus keeps saying he's coming over and he doesn't come. It keeps getting you to the point where you believe God's going to meet you, and then it just doesn't feel like it ever happens. And it's just that part. It's part of the story that if you are going to let Jesus do this work in your life that requires this navigation through challenge, you will have to get to the point where you let Jesus say to you, "Don't be afraid." You can't let that voice that says, "Just give up," that just says, "Just lay back, just stop pursuing." You've got to know a one thing that has authority to move you past that voice. The voice that rises against the voice of defeat. He did not let anyone follow him except Peter, James, and John. So, Jesus has this school just for these three. I think this is not biblical. This is just my heart. But why does Jesus keep pulling Peter, James, and John in? Because he needs them to know things for the three of them carry the costliest assignments. James, the first to die. John, the last to die, and Peter, the one to carry the tension in the middle. There's a reason Jesus pulls these three in, and there's times where Jesus has assignments for us where I need you to know things about me because I know what's coming, and you have to trust that there's a maturity I'm trying to accomplish in you that can sustain the future that I have for you. But as he does this, they walk into the house, and when they come to the home of the synagogue leader, Jesus saw commotion, which is that not the best word for the challenge? Commotion. With people crying and wailing loudly, he went in and said to them, "Why all this commotion and wailing? This child is not dead, but asleep." But they laughed at him. They laughed at him. It's like you have to first walk through the challenge of the voice of defeat, but the last voice you got to walk through to live in the one thing that makes you who you really are, you have to walk through the voice of mockery. And it's not just the mockery of the outside world. Can I tell you the mockery that's usually the loudest? The mockery that's usually the loudest is the wounded, cynical part of you that says, "You fool. You're such a fool to believe God. You're such a fool to think breakthroughs possible. You're such a fool to think that these things aren't going to keep happening, or that you're really loved or wanted, or that people actually see you or care about you, that church can actually be anything other." The voice of mockery is the last voice. But here Jesus just busts through, and he put them all out and took the child's father and mother and the disciples that were with him, and he went in and the child was, and he took her by the hand and said, "Talitha cum," which means little girl, I say to you, get up. Immediately, the girl stood up and began to walk around. She was about 12 years old. And at this, they were completely astonished. He gave them strict orders to not tell anyone about it. He told them to give her something to eat. I love that. Jesus is like, "You're probably hungry. Death makes you hungry." Supernatural healing, a 12-year-old girl, a woman bleeding for 12 years, a story of a life taken too soon, a story of life that isn't really alive, but it all changes when what? When Jesus walks into their story, because that's who he is. He is the story changer. And the identity of Jesus was greater than the identity of their circumstances, and the identity of Jesus is greater than ours. And the picture, the invitation is of a woman interrupted, displaced, who believed that the name of Jesus was worth going through any challenge to find. And so this is my heart for us. This is my invitation to you, that there are moments in your life, and there are moments in a communal life where culture, or who you really are, gets under pressure, gets under attack, gets messed with a little bit by circumstances of life. And you can make the list of all the problems, and you can make the list of all the solutions, but there is really only one thing that's going to get you from here to who God is making you to be. And it's whether there's the one thing that guides all other things. Any question mark around identity, any question mark around who we are, any question around about what we are, challenge will expose it, tempt it. And I'm just telling you that this is the season for us to come back to one thing. We're a church that loves Jesus. And it means lots of things. There's lots of things we do, but they all exist because this one thing exists. So many challenges and choices, but what marked both of these stories was one thing. They believed Jesus was who he says that he was. And it is the call of our heart. And I just wanted to tell you, as I talk about the season and the state of the square, my guess is it feels maybe a little more intense than the surface might communicate, or it might indicate that I think things are more difficult than they are. Not true. I can just tell you, I know who God is making us into. And I know what's trying to rob it. And this is a moment where, as your pastor, I needed to just tell you, we need to fight for our culture like never before. And you are going to have to get on the ground and on the dust, and you're gonna have to weave your way through people, and you're gonna have to break some rules and laws, and you're gonna have to sit in some question marks and uncertainty. But I'm telling you that together, if we run and we just come to this one thing, it's in the name of Jesus. In the name of Jesus. That is the one thing that I'm gonna just live my life constantly fascinated with the name of Jesus, that I'm gonna keep pressing in towards the name of Jesus. If there is one culture above all culture, it's that I love Jesus. He is the one I'm after, and that truth unified in us, it's what leads you through challenge. It's what will lead you into the future. Culture does what strategy cannot. It's a way of being alive, and this is what God is doing. And I want to tell you, uniquely in this season, this is exactly what he's doing. He is, in this moment, allowing our identity to get pressed on because he wants it to be so shaped. He wants it to be so secure that when the days come, when the ease is here, and revival that I believe is possible, and unity that I think is possible, and demonstrations of God's power that I think is possible, it won't be because we're living in the high of moments, but because our identity has been tested in the challenge, and it's real, it's who we are. So I just say, as I need to desperately close, it's shorter than first service though, so there's that grace. I want to ask you to lean in with me. If you're feeling that pulling away, you're not alone. And it's not even please don't even carry a sense of statement about it. But it's happening. And we have to choose the one thing in Jesus and begin to allow it to move us towards our true identity. I want to tell you, in the season of just the practical displacement, we have no home that we can gather in. Can I tell you what our church needs? It needs your home to become a sanctuary on its behalf. Because I think that even when we move into our new building, Jesus would really prefer your home as a sanctuary over a building. But I'm telling you, in this season of displacement, I'm asking you this as your pastor, This is a season where I need you to be pulling people into your home and loving them in the name of Jesus like never before. I need you to stand in this sense of culture where we are going to face for the next season the challenge of who we really are, but you want to know where we can make up for it. We can make up for it in the one-on-one life together. I'm inviting you to catch this with me. I'm inviting you into this mercy care. Like, we have to be radically moving towards people in love. And our church is just simply at a space and a season and a size where we can't do it after just the random nature of relationships. We have to have a community that says, I am in, that when crisis comes, I will be there walking with you. The season of care in the midst of the life of our church. I need you to just own with me that our culture feels a little fragile. Our love for Jesus feels a little shaky. Our passion in worship. I don't care about hype. I really hate hype, but I really love Jesus, and it's a mark of who we are. And I just want to go, hey, let's just stand in the first 5 minutes of worship and go, I'm going to hear myself way too much and I hate it, but I'm not going to let challenge in the smallest things rob me of my culture, which is that Jesus is worthy of my worship. It doesn't matter whether we're talking about the most radical pictures or the smallest simple things of what we do. I just want to tell you that Jesus, the story changer, is walking into our story, and he doesn't want to just change our story. He wants to make us into a community of story changers. But the only way we're going to get there is because the one thing, it just never gets lost. It just never gets lost. So I invite you to anchor yourself that we are a church that loves Jesus, and to fight with me for who we are. Would you stand? Prayer teams, come forward. First service, I told Lindsay we were going to respond in worship, and then I think she was up there for about 20 minutes. I think she got it at some point that I just talked too long. But I want to tell you as we close, if we can pray, let us pray. Where I just invite you to let Jesus just kind of stir your heart towards contending together, because I believe significant things are happening. Jesus, I love my church. I love those to which I belong. I thank you that you are our faithful shepherd, and you never disappoint. Sometimes, Jesus, it's hard to know the timing, the story, but we just want to tell you we believe you. You are who you say that you are. Bring transformation into the lives of our church, and come and move and have your way. In Jesus' name, amen. Listen, if we can pray, let us pray. If not, may God bless you and keep you. May he cause his face to shine upon you. May he turn his countenance to you. And may you know everywhere you go this week, you are radically loved by Jesus. Have a great day, guys.